have an emergency Zoom boardroom meeting. The company is 60 days away from launching a critical new product line, but a sudden geopolitical blockade has choked off their primary API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient supply chain. We have the CEO who's anxious, feeling intense pressure from the board. We have the head of operations, Ritu, who's defensive, stressed, over-indexed on the risk. And we have the CFO who has panicked about the sunk costs and quarterly projections.
Team, thanks for jumping in. I just got a call from the chairman. The board is tracking the geopolitical blockade. They are spooked. They are exactly like 60 days from the launch. If we don't have the API sorted, our entire Q3 and Q4 are dead in the water. Operations, what happened? Why don't we have the backup?
We followed the approved strategic roadmap. Nobody could have predicted a sudden naval blockade in that region. If the regulatory team hadn't spent 6 months delaying the approval of a secondary domestic vendor, we wouldn't be in this mess. I can't manufacture things out of thin air. We are looking at a minimum 90-day delay period.
90 days? Are you losing your mind? Do you know how much capital we have already locked into the marketing list and pre-launch distribution channel? We have burned through 45 crores this quarter alone on infrastructure setup. If we delay by 3 months, our stock market is going to take a massive hit and competitors will capture the market share. We need to force the international vendor to airlift the remaining stock through an alternative route right now.
Airlift? Through an active contract zone? That will drive our landed costs up by 400%, destroying our gross margins entirely. And it is a massive regulatory risk. If those batches get compromised or delayed at customs under emergency protocols, we lose everything anyway.
This is disaster. If we launch late, the board will call for structural change. And if we airlift, we'll bleed financially. We are completely trapped. I need answers, not excuses. We are not. Who allowed a single source on a specific component?
Exactly. We need accountability here. We cannot tell investors we failed because we didn't foresee standard geopolitical volatility. This is total failure of operational risk management.
Team, pause. Let's take a collective breath right now. Stop. Look at what we are doing. We are climbing the ladder of fall. We are letting an external shock dictate our internal equilibrium. Right now, we are reacting to the board's anxiety. We are reacting to the sunk cost. We are hunting for scapegoats. This changes the physical reality of the supply chain. We are operating in Buddhi Nasha. Our strategic intellect has shut down.
I do appreciate this philosophy, but the clock is ticking. We don't have time for meditation. We just have 60 days,
Exactly. Because the clock is ticking, we cannot afford a single fragmented thought. If the ocean tosses every time a turbulent river enters it, it loses its identity. We need to be Achala Pratishtham, unshakable. Let's step out of this mental storm. Let's strip away the emotions.
Fine, but the 45 crore burn is real.
The burn is a historical metric. It is a sunk cost. Worrying about it won't manufacture a single gram of that API. Hello everyone and welcome back. Without wasting much time, because today we are in a very important and an interesting session, let's dive in directly. So now, today we are on session 9, maintaining a steady core. Look, when a massive shock hits an industry, whether it's a sudden supply chain collapse or a brutal market dip, what's the first thing leaders generally do? They scramble. They scramble outwards. They look for a quick tactical fix, a defensive legal workaround, a new marketing spin. But ancient strategic wisdom tells us something else. External tactics are completely useless if the team running them is in a state of blind panic. Today, we are bridging the ruthless realism of Chanakya Niti with the mental armor of Bhagavad Gita. Our goal today isn't to look at abstract theories. It is essentially a refresher for what we learned from sessions 1 to 9. It is about learning exactly how to anchor our mind, neutralize the boardroom chaos, and execute with absolute, unshakable clarity when everything around is catching fire. So let's get on to it. Before we unpack our crisis playbook, we need to ground ourselves in what we have already learned about self-mastery. True leadership isn't tested when numbers are up and skies are clear. It is tested when we are in trenches. To understand how a modern executive team keeps its footing today, we are going to quickly revisit the 3 defining moments we analyzed earlier in the series. The psychological paralyzation at Kurukshetra, the split-second sanity at LaGuardia runaway escape, and the legendary self-resilience shown during the Taj Hotel crisis. Let me just revisit all the three. For example, the paralyzation of Kurukshetra. In modern times, I would call it as the psychology of executive freeze. Let's look at what happened. It was the ultimate geopolitical standoff. Two massive elite armies consisting of millions of warriors all lined up on the fields of Kurukshetra. The war horns had already been sounded, the weapons had been drawn, the dust was settling. Now, this wasn't just a minor fight, it was an all-out war for the crown. Arjuna, the supreme commander, the ultimate warrior, with the ultimate strategist, the executioner, on his side. He goes out there in the middle of the battlefield with the help of Krishna between the two armies to survey the terrain. Now, what happens? When Arjuna looks across the line, he doesn't see abstract competition. He sees his uncles, his mentors, his cousins, his childhood friends. Suddenly, the reality what he has to execute hits his emotional operating system. And what happens? There's a panic attack. His legs give out. His mouth gets completely dry. His body trembles. His skin feels like it's burning. Ultimately, his hand shakes so violently that his legendary weapon, the Gandiva bow, slips right out of his fingers and clatters on the ground. He sinks in the back of his chariot, completely paralyzed. Now, this is the classic corporate executive freeze. Arjuna doesn't lose his technical skill. What happens over here is he's still the best archer in the world. But what collapsed was his internal core, his internal operating system. So when the market shock hits, the leader often experiences this exact emotional paralyzation. The mind enters a state of buddhi nasha, the destruction of strategic intellect. The leader drops the tools because the emotional weight of the outcome overpowers one's focus to process. The second case, the LaGuardia flight. In that, look at it. It was a high-stress modern cockpit. A commercial airliner is coming down the runway at about 150 miles per hour, completely committed to land. And suddenly, what happens? Out of nowhere, an unannounced obstacle appears directly on the active runway. Suddenly, the cockpit alert experiences a catastrophic system-wide failure. Alarms are blaring, red lights are flashing, and conflicting data is throwing the instruments into total chaos. Now, in aviation, the default human reflex under sudden terror is to violently pull the controls, freeze or overcorrect, actions that almost always result in a fatal crash. But the pilots on this flight did something extraordinary. They initiated a deliberate, self-imposed 10-second observation gap. For a few heartbeats, they didn't touch a single control. Instead, they forced their minds as if they were objective third-party scientists observing a simulation, separated from the true visual data, the mechanical noise, isolated the core problem, and executed a flawless, evasive maneuver that saved almost everybody on board. Sadly, the brave pilots lost their lives. So when a complete disaster strikes your company, the boardroom's baseline instinct is to pull the fire alarm, to make frantic knee-jerk moves. By introducing the small gap between the terrifying market stimulus and your organization's response, you break the panic conditioning, quiet the external noise, and unlock your true strategic intellect. The third example, Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, infiltrated by heavily armed terrorists. Fire was tearing out through the historic corridors. Explosions were rocking the lobby. Active gunfire was echoing through the restaurants. It was an absolute war zone, blanketed in smoke and sheer terror. The remarkable part of Taj Hotel crisis wasn't the building's structural integrity. It was the behavior of the frontline staff, waiters, bellhops, chefs, housekeeping crew, many of them young interns earning modest wages. They did not run away. They had easy access to the back exit doors, the kitchen windows. They could have saved themselves in minutes. But what did they do? Instead, they formed human shields to protect the guests. They quietly guided hundreds of terrified people through the secret corridors, went back into the active fire zones to fetch fresh water and medicine, and stood calmly in front of the doors to block the line of fire. Chef Hemant Oberoi famously stayed in the kitchen, keeping his staff calm, preparing basic meals for trapped guests and systematically organizing evacuations. Why did they do what they did? It wasn't for the paycheck. It wasn't because a manager was breathing down their necks. It happened because the Taj Hotel had built an unbreakable inner operating system grounded in cultural baseline of Atithi Devo Bhavo. The guest is God. When external environment collapses into an absolute nightmare chaos, the employees didn't have a corporate handbook for terrorist attack, but they didn't need one. When the external environment collapsed into an absolute nightmare chaos, the employees didn't have a corporate handbook for terrorist attack, but they didn't need one. Their internal core was so completely aligned with the company's core values that their automatic default reflex under the threat of death was to uphold their duty. So, what is the lesson over here? In business, high performance is completely unsustainable if it is separated from high character governance. When a structural crisis strikes your firm, your values are not a soft marketing slogan. They are a literal shield that keep your entire enterprise from fracturing. The entire journey of strategic architect comes down to one fundamental shift, moving away from the reactive chaos and stepping into a proactive clarity. Let's be honest, reactive chaos is incredibly expensive. It burns out your best talent, wastes your capital runway, and makes your boardroom decisions reckless. Proactive clarity, on the other hand, means that no matter how fast the ground is shifting beneath your feet, your leadership team operates with absolute calm intent. So how do we make that shift happen when the pressure is mounting? Let's look at mastering the terrain. To master any business crisis, you have to take a marker and draw a hard, uncompromising line right down in the middle of your reality. On one side, you have the external noise. This is the market alarm bells, the sudden economic dips, the competitor blind sheets, the geopolitical shocks. Here is the hard truth. These are completely 100% uncontrollable variables. When a leadership team wastes time trying to wish away or control the external noise, it creates a massive frustration and floods the boardroom with anxiety. Now look at the other side of the line, your internal core. This is the only true point of leverage you own. Your strategic focus, your capital decisions, your organizational will live right here. Real victory in a volatile market never comes from trying to force the external storm to calm down. It comes from anchoring your true internal core so firmly that the storm outside cannot shake you. Let's look at how this internal core actually plays out in real life. High stakes environment. Think about the three cases we just analyzed. The Kurukshetra conflict. This was the ultimate example of leadership breakdown. Right before the biggest battle of his life, Arjuna, the ultimate warrior, is completely paralyzed by inner doubt. He drops his bow. His external skills are flawless, but his internal core is cracked under the emotional weight. Next, LaGuardia collision escape. Total systems failure, an unexpected obstacle on the runway, and seconds to live. What do the pilots do? They didn't slam the controls in panic. They forced a brilliant 10-second observation gap to look at the raw data, step out of the panic loop, and fly the plane to safety. Third, the Taj Hotel resilience. Frontline employees completely shut down their own survival instincts during the terror attack to systematically protect their guests, driven entirely by their core organizational value. Guest is God. Atithi Devo Bhava. So, when a surprise crisis lands on your desk, it instantly sets off what we call an emotional fear across the leadership team. The fever is, when a crisis lands on your desk, it instantly sets off what we call an emotional fever across the leadership team. The fever is fueled by three psychological traps. Calm, that is, an obsessive desire for specific results. Growth, reactive anger that things aren't going your way. And lobh, that is pure panic-driven fear of losing capital. So when these three take over, they create an ego refraction or a detour, a diversion. Think of it like a muddy, turbulent pond. You drop a gold coin in the bottom. You can't see where it is because the water is constantly being stirred by the wind. The coin is real and it is right there, but the chaos of the water completely hides it. As a leader, you have to let the sediment settle before you see the ground truth so that you find your coin. Raw market data enters your boardroom, but it hits the prism of your anxieties and bends out of shape. A panicked executive isn't looking at the reality anymore. They are reacting to the distorted nightmare version of data. To survive, a calibrated leader has to see through this refraction, detour, audit the team's panic traps, and cut straight to the cold, hard facts. When I spoke about the fever, what is fever? You can call it you can call it out when decisions are starting to be driven by short-term anger, panic, or defensive pride. Filter, ask your team directly. Are we reading this compliance report or competitor move cleanly, or are we filtering it through our worst fears? The prism, shatter the corporate ego. A master strategist strips away the self-preservation to see the absolute unvarnished truth of what the business needs right now. So let's look at the neutralizing distortion by the anchored decision making. Once you identify your mental distortions, you pivot instantly to anchored decision making. Look, clearing your mind isn't a passive meditation exercise. It is a combat tool. When you anchor your decisions, you effectively unhook your corporate strategy from the day-to-day madness of the market. You stop playing catch up with every headline and you force your competition to react to you instead. How do you do that? That kind of unshakable consistency. It requires mastering the core of the choice. First, we need equilibrium. This means building a mindset that is profoundly indifferent to short-term hype or temporary setbacks. If your boardroom throws a massive party over a minor win and falls into a deep depression over a minor loss, it clearly means you do not have equilibrium. Second, understand the anatomy of the choice. When crisis hits, your default reflex is to slide down the old corporate conditioning, hiding bad numbers, pointing fingers, or freezing budgets out of sheer anxiety. To break free, we must create a deliberate conscious pause before the market shock and your organization's response. In that tiny operational gap, your panic reflexes disappear and your true strategic genius takes over. Next, let's look at the executive compass. When visibility drops down to absolute zero, how do you steer the ship? You pull out the executive compass. A master strategist treats the organization's core values as an absolute, unshakable North Star. When you are navigating with extreme ambiguity, your job isn't to miraculously predict an unpredictable future. Your job is to embrace the unknown while ensuring that your team does not lose its morale, its strategic path. Let this sink in. High performance inside a company is fundamentally unsustainable if it is disconnected from high character governance. When the world cracks open, it's your ethical alignment and clarity of purpose that keeps your enterprise from fracturing. So let's look at the gallery of mastery, the past cases. Again, in the first case of Kurukshetra, we tracked a leadership team facing absolute gridlock from the regulators. Instead of starting an expensive public PR war, they treated their boardroom as an invisible battlefield. They turned inward, completely re-engineered their internal compliance and erased external friction through internal brilliance. The second case, look at the LaGuardia collision. Similar to a tech firm which is watching its market valuation drop by 40% overnight. When investors panicked, the CEO locked the doors to the noise, anchored the product engineering team, and focused entirely on shipping great software. They restored market trust completely within 12 months. Third case, similar to the Taj Hotel resilience. A legacy manufacturer broke through 20 years of stubborn corporate conditioning to abandon a dying core asset and shift to an entirely automated future. Now, this is a tangible proof of steady core rewriting to an automated future, rewriting business history. What is important is to focus on the process over the outcome. To sum up everything, it's your internal or your inner operating system versus the external tools. You can buy the most expensive enterprise software, hire the flashiest consulting firms, and have mountains of data. But if your leadership team's inner operating system is glitching under pressure, all those tools will fail. We must be obsessed with process or outcome. When we execute our internal process flawlessly, the external results will take care of themselves. Coming to the, as you can see over here, the beautiful ocean mindset. Now, this brings us to a beautiful concept from Bhagavad Gita, Achala Pradisha, the ocean mindset. Think of the ocean. Thousands of roaring, turbulent rivers are constantly rushing into it, dumping millions of gallons of chaotic water. Yet, the ocean's baseline never changes. It remains perfectly calm, steady, unshakable. As a leader, your mind has to become that ocean. You need the capacity to absorb intense market shocks, competitor strikes, and conflicting board demands without ever letting them disturb your inner equilibrium. We need to talk about expanding your inner capacity. Your mind cannot afford to be that shallow puddle where a bad quarter or a missed metrics creates a massive chaotic splash. It has to be a deep, resilient ecosystem. Your target for emotional reactivity when things collapse exactly 0.0. Now, how do we translate the beautiful ocean mindset into the brutal corporate execution? Chanakya Niti gives us an incredibly practical, unemotional weapon called the clinical audit. When an emergency hits, you strip away all feelings and answer 5 questions with cold, hard metrics. Time. What are the actual market cycles or volatility horizons that we are facing? Second, allies. Who are the real strategic partners versus the partners who are there in fair weather, who disappear when the moment the things get tough? Terrain. What is the precise, unvarnished reality of our regulatory and economic landscape right now? Metrics. What are the actual definitive financial losses versus realistic gains? Stop guessing. Capacity. What is our true capital runway and operational strength? A master strategist lives in these questions. Drop the boardroom assumptions and run this audit and ground your team in reality. As Chanakya says, Kaha kalah kani Mitrani ko deshah kau. That is, an executive must continuously ponder what are the current market realities, who are my true allies, what is the terrain, what are the actual losses and projected gains. The steps to crisis calibration. Once your audit gives you the ground truth, you immediately run the 5-step crisis calibration to steady the ship. What are they? Isolate the facts, aggressively separate verified data from emotional hearsay or alarmist panic. Opinions are worth zero until they are backed by figures. Map influence. Stop wasting your executive energy on things outside your control. Focus 100% on your resources, on the exact strategic levers you can pull right now. Check bias. Audit your boardroom. Make sure your team isn't falling into the catastrophic thinking or analyzing risk or paralyzing risk aversion. Fourth, align value. Ensure your quick fix doesn't violate your North Star. Never trade your long-term integrity for short-term band-aid. The last step, execute calmly. Commit to the path with absolute detachment from outside anxiety. Put your head down and execute flawlessly. When a leader successfully combines the clinical precision of Chanakya's audit with the unshakable calm of ocean mindset, they become what ancient texts call the Sthitapagya leader. This is the absolute gold standard for corporate leadership under fire. Such a leader doesn't freeze, doesn't panic, doesn't second guess. He becomes a steady anchor that stabilizes the entire enterprise. Now, let's look at a boardroom circuit breaker activity. In this activity, there are 3 acts. First act is of chaos. Second act is where you pause. And the third is the action. In chaos, imagine the sudden geopolitical blockade, completely choking off the raw material supply just 60 days before a massive product launch. Panic skyrockets. The boardroom enters Buddhinasha, that is total shutdown of strategic intellect. The team falls into a blind, frantic fight or flight loop of anxiety, blame, and risk aversion. Second is the operational pause. To save the company, the leader has to hit the emergency circuit breaker and force an operational pause. Why? Because you need to stop the bleeding. You need to stop climbing the ladder of panic. You call out the defensive, finger pointing, eliminate vanity metrics, and step completely out of the mental storm to reset the room's collective intelligence. Act 3 is the calibrated action. When panic is neutralized, you deploy the 5-step playbook. You isolate the facts, you map the controllables, you check the bias, you align the values by activating the steady core, and eventually you execute. So in the activity that we are going to play right now, the geopolitical blockades, imagine, have completely taken over the primary active pharmaceutical ingredient supply offline. It's a high stakes product launch exactly 60 days from now. Panic is running through the sales and marketing. The leadership team is on the verge of Buddhinasha. Instead of letting the room spin out of control, let's step to the Act 3. In that, the leaders isolate the facts, they map the controllables, and align the North Star. What is the North Star? Anchor the response in the core values of the company. That is patient safety, absolute operational integrity, and the leadership decides that they will communicate with total proactive transparency to the tier 1 healthcare partners immediately. Look at what just happened. Thorough clinical calibration took a catastrophic industry shock and turned it into precise, unshakable strategic response. That is leadership. So here's the Act 1, the reactive chaos. We have an emergency Zoom boardroom meeting. The company is 60 days away from launching a critical new product line, but a sudden geopolitical blockade has choked off their primary API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient supply chain. We have the CEO who's anxious, feeling intense pressure from the board. We have the head of operations, Ritu, who's defensive, stressed, over-indexed on the risk. And we have the CFO who has panicked about the sunk costs and quarterly projections.
Team, thanks for jumping in. I just got a call from the chairman. The board is tracking the geopolitical blockade. They are spooked. We are exactly like 60 days from the launch. If we don't have the API sorted, our entire Q3 and Q4 are dead in the water. Operations, what happened? Why don't we have the backup?
We followed the approved strategic roadmap. Nobody could have predicted a sudden naval blockade in that region. If the regulatory team hadn't spent 6 months delaying the approval of a secondary domestic vendor, we wouldn't be in this mess. I can't manufacture things out of thin air. We are looking at a minimum 90-day delay period.
90 days? Are you losing your mind? Do you know how much capital we have already locked into the marketing list and pre-launch distribution channel? We have burned through 45 crores this quarter alone on infrastructure setup. If we delay by 3 months, our stock market is going to take a massive hit and competitors will capture the market share. We need to force the international vendor to airlift the remaining stock through an alternative route right now.
Airlift? Through an active conflict zone? that will drive our landed costs up by 400%, destroying our gross margins entirely. And it is a massive regulatory risk. If those batches get compromised or delayed at customs under emergency protocols, we lose everything anyway.
This is disaster. If we launch late, the board will call for structural change, and if we airlift, we'll bleed financially. We are completely trapped. I need answers, not excuses. We are not. Who allowed a single sourced on a specific component?
Exactly. We need accountability here. We cannot tell investors we failed because we didn't foresee standard geopolitical volatility. This is total failure of operational risk management.
So as you saw, this was a typical example of Buddhinasha, the destruction of strategic discrimination. The leaders are in a fight or flight loop. They're trading blame, they're over-indexing on fear about sunk costs, about board anger, and they're looking at the crisis through a distorted reactive lens. So now let's look at what happens when there is an operational pause. The same Zoom meeting, but there's a senior advisor, the chief strategy officer, who comes in, who's a part of the executive team, who steps in to actively trigger the circuit breaker to halt the downward spiral. The chief strategy officer. Team, pause. Let's take a collective breath right now. Stop. Look at what we are doing. We are climbing the ladder of fall. We are letting an external shock dictate our internal equilibrium. Right now, we are reacting to the board's anxiety. We are reacting to the sunk cost. We are hunting for scapegoats. This changes the physical reality of the supply chain. We are operating in Buddhinasha. Our strategic intellect has shut down.
I do appreciate this philosophy, but the clock is ticking. We don't have time for meditation. We just have 60 days,
Exactly. Because the clock is ticking, we cannot afford a single fragmented thought. If the ocean tosses every time a turbulent river enters it, it loses its identity. We need to be Achala Pratishtham, unshakable. Let's step out of this mental storm. Let's strip away the emotions.
Fine, but the 45 crore burn is real.
The burn is a historical metric. It is a sunk cost. Worrying about it won't manufacture a single gram of that API. Operations, let's drop the defense. Finance, let's drop the blame. Let's run a clinical audit right here, right now, using Chanakya's framework. What is the time? Who are our true allies? What is the terrain? What are the actual numbers? Let us separate the hard facts from our psychological panic.
Fair enough. If we strip away the noise, the raw reality is that the international route is completely dead for the next 90 days. This is our fixed boundary.
Good. That is a factual anchor. Let's build from here. Scene ends. Now, as you saw, by purposely introducing the operational pause, what has happened is the room has transitioned from a shallow reactive puddle into a deeper ocean-like ecosystem that is capable of absorbing the shock. Now we get on to the act D, that is activating the steady core. So, 10 minutes later, the emotional charge has completely left the room. The grid of faces on Zoom is now focused, collaborative, and entirely analytical. They are using the 3-step playbook. Isolate facts, map controllables, and align with the North Star. Again, we have the characters, we have CEO, we have the operations manager, we have the CFO, and we have the chief strategy officer. But now the difference is that they're all working in a perfect harmony.
Yeah, all right, team. Let's execute. Phase 1, isolate the facts. Operations, give me the clinical numbers. Without any projections of doom. Do we actually have?
The international shipment is delayed by 90 days. That is fact 1. Fact 2 is we have 45 days of safety stock already sitting in our domestic warehouse. Fact 3. This leaves us with a net deficit of exactly 15 days of inventory for the launch phase.
Let's move to phase 2. Map controllables. What do we control? We cannot control the naval blockade, but we do control our internal capital allocation. We have an unallocated emergency reserve of 10 crores.
Excellent. Now, let's cross-reference our controllables with Chanakya's audit. Who are our true allies and what is the terrain? What about the secondary domestic vendor that was waiting for the regulatory approval?
Their facility is fully operational. They are based locally, so no geopolitical risk. The only bottleneck is that they are missing the final technical validation stamp from our quality team, a process that normally takes 45 days.
Yeah, we control that timeline. If we deploy on-site dedicated quality task force to be in their plan by tomorrow morning, can we compress the validation to come down by 10 days?
If we reallocate our top 3 engineers to live at their plant next week, yes, absolutely possible.
And the cost to fast track the production batch will consume about 4 crores of emergency reserve. It keeps our gross margin within acceptable 5% variance, completely avoiding the catastrophic 400% surge of an international airlift.
Great. Now let's test this against phase 3. Align with the North Star. Our core organizational value is absolute transparency and uncompromised quality. Mr. CEO, how do we communicate this to our tier 1 distribution partners?
Yeah, we proactively reach out to them tomorrow. We don't hide the supply shift. We inform them to ensure absolute compliance with the supply chain security. We are onboarding a premium domestic partner. We keep them original launch date. We keep the original launch date, but we adjust the initial delivery rollout to be staggered by 7 days. It protects our integrity, keeps our stakeholders aligned, and completely neutralizes the crisis.
Beautifully calibrated. No panic, no friction. Just steady surgical execution. Let's deploy the task force. So, for all those who are watching this video, it's time for you to think, where in your current business are you acting like the leader A, that is the CEO, or like the leader B, the operations manager, or like the leader C, that is the CFO in Act 1? What is your personal circuit breaker when your leadership team falls into the Buddhi Nasha? Great. Now that you have seen the activity, what just happened? Let's conclude. For today's session, before we open the floor to discussion of the boardroom strategy, I want to leave you with one defining law of executive execution. The world follows the standards set by the very best. An enterprise crisis is never an absolute disaster. It is simply the ultimate unfiltered test of foundational architecture. When the market cracks, organizations do not magically rise to the level of lofty goals or quarterly projections. They fall directly to the level of their fundamental training. Keep your mind steady and keep your execution swift. Above all, stay anchored. Thank you. Let's open the floor to discussion.
I'm reminded of one saying where the culture of the organization must percolate down to every employee. And this is a lesson from mythology, where Narada, who constantly is chanting Narayana's name, he keeps saying Narayana, Narayana all the time, and he's very upset. He goes to Vishnu and tells him that I am the one who's chanting Narayana all the time, yet there is no temple for me on earth. However, your vehicle, that is Garuda is worshipped in front of your temple all the time. He doesn't even, I have never heard him chant your name at all. So why this unfairness? So Vishnu, being a good manager, he sits him down and says, yeah, you have a point. This lesson being that you have to listen to even the dissidents in your own group. And then he asks him, what is the problem? So Narada says, I'm always chanting your name. I have no importance in your realm. So at that time, there is a commotion. He goes outside and Vishnu says, looks like there's some commotion. Go outside and check. It turns out that there is a milkmaid who's carrying 2 pots of milk. And because a snake crosses her path, she drops the pots of milk. One pot drops completely and it is lost. And she begins to cry. Narada comes back to Vishnu and says, this is what happened. So Vishnu says, oh dear, that is sad. So what did you tell her? He says, I didn't tell her anything. So what is she going to do now? I don't know what she's going to do. Let me go and find out. So he goes back and then he asks the milkmaid, what are you going to do now? And the milkmaid says, oh dear, because I have only 1 pot of milk and I was going to deliver this to Lakshmi, she's the goddess of wealth, she will pay me the price of 2 pots of milk for 1 pot of milk because she is so rich. And Narada gets really mad at her, saying you're being opportunistic. It's not fair for you to do that, and scolds her and comes back to Vishnu to report this. And just at that time, Garuda comes. So he says, I'm sorry, I came a little late, but this is what happened. I saw a milkmaid. She lost 1 pot of her milk. So I consoled her because I have seen you consoling your bhaktas. So I have consoled her and told her that you should go to Lakshmi and ask for the price of 2 pots of milk. She will give you gladly. And this is because I have learned from you meaning from Vishnu, who is the sustainer, meaning he has taken the ethics of the organization and used it in practice. And then Vishnu turns to Narada and says, do you have anything to say? Narada understands that what he was doing was just an employee's job. go find out, come report. Again, another question, go find out, come and report. He wasn't using the ethics or the value of his Ishta Devata or employer, whatever you may say. And he was just being employee. An employee is never worshipped. An entrepreneur or someone who takes initiative, who understands what his employer wants and ethics are, imbibed, only that person will be worshipped. That is why Garuda is worshipped, Narada is not worshipped. So this I thought was very relevant when we talk of organizations, where organizational employees, they say, we understand the culture of the organization, but they don't really use it when they are talking to a customer, when they are talking to a vendor. They are not actually using the culture of the organization. So this is something maybe we need to bring employees or organizations to understand. This was my input. Sorry if I was a little too long.
No, it was correct. It was correct. It was correct. It was absolutely relevant because a leader should not be, whatever is the external chaos, it is not in your hands. If you look at it from Narada's perspective, Narada, when he saw this, it should have been his, yes, he is the ultimate devotee of Vishnu, but yet he thought like a common devotee. He didn't really put himself in the seat of Vishnu, his Lord. He did not think that he is like the spokesperson of the Lord. He did not imbibe the mindset of Vishnu. Had he done that, which Garuda did, so Garuda took it upon him as his duty, that he didn't feel that he needs to call Vishnu or he needs to speak to Vishnu to handle this crisis. He knew the mindset of his Lord so well that immediately he spoke on the Lord's behalf. And that's the reason, even in any crisis, any organizational situation, they have clearly, they clearly decide on who's the spokesperson for an organization, because a spokesperson speaks on behalf of the organization. And in crisis, it's absolutely important that who is speaking on behalf of the organization. So that that is the first way to prevent, different thought processes going out, because it can only worsen a crisis. So here, Garuda was, the spokesperson and not Narada. So Debbie, Bharat, any thoughts? Debbie? Okay, Bharat.
Just to add, Rupa madam's view. See, many times what happens is, no matter like how much sensitized I am, in dealing like not being like a chaotic, making prudent decisions, etc. But still, the situation overrides. That's what that's the reason I guess where in terms of crisis, always like a human tendency is like they get panic. That's the way we evolved actually. It has to do something with evolution, where our bodies were prepared in such a way that when you're getting some where some trigger of panic is there. What I can say, where you feel any risk, you just tend to get a panic mode, right?
Yeah, so there it's like, you tend to feel that whenever, a common employee thinks that when there is crisis, I cannot handle it, let my leader handle it. Whereas a difference in a common employee and an employee who's on the path of becoming a leader is that he or she is prepared to face the risk. He or she doesn't wait for the leader. They are prepared to go ahead and face the storm themselves. That is what the difference is. Yes, Rupa.
I have a real life situation where as a part of running I used to be an entrepreneur and I ran a software company for a long time. We had two very large customers, both $1 million customers. Suddenly we get this news that one of the $1 million customer is being taken over by another bank. What bank was the customer? And therefore our product is going to be removed. So which means a very important part, nearly 60% of our revenue was going to go away. Believe me, there was chaos. I'm not saying I was the epitome of calmness and this one. The first meeting, I also raved and ranted and said, how couldn't we have not seen it? When we spoke to the customer last, why didn't we hear this? All that. But very soon, sanity prevailed. And we said, okay, fine. If we are losing this customer, how can we get another customer? And then we learned our lesson to not have 3 large customers. Instead, we have 10 small customers. Yes. So even if there's a crisis at one, the others will be able to bolster the revenue and we won't become negative.
Yes.
However, some of our key employees, they were so panicked, they left us. Key employees, people on whom we depended. We spoke to them. Out of the 5 who came to us with resignations on the same day, we were able to convert 3, but 2 we still lost. So the 3 of them, we were able to tell them, look here, yes, this is a problem. Yes, we will handle it. And yes, maybe there are sacrifices to be made, but there is only one way we can get it done. Is that you guys stay and we'll work through this. And that was a real example. It was a lot of stress, but yes, we were able to do it. So I can completely relate to this chaos mindset which happens in meetings. I mean, everyone's blaming everybody, including me. I was blaming the sales guys who went to meet the customer and said, you didn't know that the customer was being acquired by another bank. So if you had told us before, we would have pitched a little harder. We would have convinced even the buyer to buy our software as well. So yes, I mean, this happens.
True. Bharat, anything that you would like to join? I know it's basically today's session is, Bharat, honestly, how do you feel the past 8 sessions have been? Do you think they have really contributed? And today's session was it essentially a summarization of the 8? Because here we are only talking right now of the mindset, preparing the mindset, not even acting. Right now, it is only the first phase where we are preparing the mindset. Part 2 is how to act. And then part 3 is we understand the way we react, because as in Bhagavad Gita, we have these 3 states of mind.
That's right.
Tamas, Sattva, Tamas, and
Rajas.
Rajas. Yes. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. So that will be covering in part 3. And then part 4 is the strategic leadership mindset. So you think this is really helping?
Yeah, see, programs like this are in a staggered manner. You need to have it, because you cannot imagine someone is hungry. You're gonna feed. I mean, keep all the delicacies at one time in a single go. What he's gonna do? He's gonna puke, right? I mean, it doesn't absorb. So right way it is going. That's my honest take of it. So it's going on right way. That's the feedback.
Because I'm literally breaking each component so that a person can step by step work towards becoming a strategic leader. I mean, as you rightly said, if somebody is malnourished, you cannot expect that malnourished person, or even somebody with a average body, you cannot expect that person to suddenly become extremely fit. So it will take time. So you have to stagger to condition that person. So the part 1 was totally conditioning the mind, preparing that person for the response. Initially they just focus on maybe even in exercising, you focus on stretching, you focus on just few steps at a time. Then you maybe later on in the next step, you focus on the little heavy exercises, on also the diet.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's what
I'm trying to do. Remember the prelude, where we were discussing, me, you, and I think
Meenakshi.
Meenakshi, yeah.
Yes.
So in that only, we had this all, I went through deeply. It was beautifully done.
Rupa ma'am, what is your thought on this before we end the meeting?
Yeah, I think that these are useful, very useful. I think only wish that more people would participate and understand the value of it.
Yes.
I wish there was some way in which we could get everybody to be a part of this. I don't know what is the way, but I certainly know that if only people would attend, maybe if they attended 1 or 2, then they'd get hooked. Right now, they don't see the value of it. But as a participant, I certainly feel that there is a lot of value. There is a lot of value in sharing. There's a lot of value in listening. When you listen, sometimes certain things click in your own mind, saying, this happened and this is how I reacted. Oh, if I had done this, maybe the result would have been different. Or I'm glad I did something like this. Unless you listen to something with a detached mind, then only you understand the learnings. So I think these are very essential, very good. But like I said, I only wish.
Maybe you all can put a few words in that group, for people to understand.
And one more point I would like to add, Rupa ma'am, you also on board. It's your thing, right? All this, whatever you're doing. I mean, whatever. See, I mean, I know because she has authored a book.
Oh,
I've authored 7.
7 books.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes, it is deeply connected. I know what we are presenting actually.
Yeah, true.
Ma'am, please put in the names of the books.
Sure, I will do that.
Yeah. So
The last 2 are.
I was a co-speaker in one session. Rupa, do you remember? Yeah.
Yes.
We were co-speakers in one session, where we were taking, we were presenting a paper.
So,
next Sunday,
I'm committing right now.
Hopefully, we should have the session 1 of part 2. That should be interesting. So, I think it's an achievement that we have finished 1 part. There are 3 more parts. Let's see how this is working out.
Okay.
Sandhya ma'am, I think the weeknight plan we can think of. I think it'll work somehow.
Let's try.
Debbie,
The meeting is coming to an end.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sandhya ma'am. Yeah.